Good afternoon, members of the MRC Joint Committee, ambassadors, representatives of development partners, representatives of broader stakeholders, my fellow Mekong citizens. In 2 days, it is Mekong Day. On that day last year, I gave the inaugural Mekong address. The idea was to tell as it is, what's happening in the Mekong, what's being done about it, given the mandate and the role of the MRC. I said that very carefully, given the mandate and role of the MRC, as we cannot do everything. The hope is to inspire you in your respective roles and interests, to complement our efforts, to fill our gaps, to do what we cannot. I said at the time that it was time to celebrate the birth of the Mekong River Commission, 27 years after 1995. But it was also a time to reflect deeply and be aware of the unprecedented challenges the Mekong, the largest river in Southeast Asia, a great world river, was facing. 4 straight years of low flows and drought have brought hardships to the millions of vulnerable people around the basin. And do you remember that little virus, COVID-19? It seems 1 year later we may forget how to put on a mask properly, or even log on and do Zoom or WebEx conference call. But what cannot be forgotten is the untold suffering that COVID has brought and exacerbated the environmental crisis. Do I have good news this year? The answer is yes and no. Everyone wants good news last, so I will begin with some alarming news. At the MRC, we still track the state of the basin through our State of Basin Monitoring System, which provide the status and trends of key indicators in environment, social, economic, climate change, and cooperation. Let's start with the environment. In the year 2022, last year, drought may have subsided and we may have more rain, but the environment still faces several pressing challenges. 5 are key. 1, the changing flow regime. 2, sediment. 3, salinity. 4, plastic. 5, climate change. First, the flow regime. Back in 1995, the annual flow was far different. Compared to the long-term average, over the past 10 years or so, our monitoring has recorded higher dry season flows, but lower flood season flows. So this brings opportunities and challenges. The greatest concern is at the Tonle Sap, Southeast Asia's biggest lake, and the beating heart of the Mekong. During the dry season, do you know that the lake flows to the Mekong? And during the wet season, it amazingly travels back up and reverses its flow, and the lake expands 5 times. But as the flood season flow have reduced, the amount of reverse flow into the Tonle Sap also declined. Reverse flow is important because it produces and maintains biodiversity and fish catch. At the MRC, we have also a flow monitoring regime, and things are not looking good. For example, in 2006, the average number of the violations of this threshold was only 7. Last year, we breached more than 100 days. With the reverse flow reduced, the outflows into the Mekong also reduced. December last year, the average outflow from the Mekong was only half of what was in 1995. I repeat, half. Second, sediment. On the mainstream, it continues to decline, largely as a consequence of sediment trapping, as well as a lot of sand mining. The only exception is at the top of the river, Lower Mekong, in Chiang Saen, where sediment had already declined considerably prior to 2009 and appears to have stabilized somewhat. Further down, at Luang Prabang since 2011, at Mukdahan since 2009, the average daily sediment loads, according to our monitoring, has reduced by 90%. And at Phnom Penh by 60%. And finally, in the south, in Tanjau, by half. The reduction of sediments affects floodplain productivity, as well as riverbank stability, among other things. The Mekong cannot be the Mekong unless it has sediment. Third, saltwater intrusion into the delta. Over the past 30 years, during the dry season, an average of 12,000 kilometers of the delta has been affected by salinity concentrations above, the scientist says, 1 gram per liter. What's even more worrying is that during this period, the areas affected by salinity has increased to 138 square kilometers per year. That is above 4 grams per liter. Now, at 1 gram per liter, there are some consequences for irrigation. At 2 grams, not even talking about 4 grams, there can be severe consequences for paddy irrigation with food implications and export. Fourth, plastic pollution. The Mekong is estimated in one study to contribute the 10th largest amount of plastic debris into the world's ocean, up to 100 tons a day. That's like, imagine a giant whale of waste thrown into the river and into the ocean every day. Within the Mekong itself, macroplastic waste typically accumulates at ports and piers with an average accumulation of about 12 kilograms a day, 21 kilograms a day. And this is the only debris you can see. Our monitoring detected microplastic in water at 1 to 2 particles per liter. And do you know that 20% of sample fish has microplastic? Riverine plastic pollution can harm aquatic life in multiple ways, from entanglement to ingestion of toxic substances. And with microplastic in fish, our food chain can become contaminated. Fifth, climate change and the consequences for floods and drought. On flood, maybe some good news is that the frequency of the typhoon formation in the Pacific Ocean over the past 30 years correspond to a reduction of the number of heavy rainy days in the Lower Mekong. The flooded areas of the basin also has not increased over the last 20 years. Meanwhile, drought frequency has increased in the last 10 years, so from 2010 to 2020. Compared to the 10 years before, so that is 2000 to 2009, drought has increased. While there is a trend, it seems, that flood frequency and increasing drought, flood frequency reducing, increasing drought frequency, make no mistake, we are still, and we were still faced with a lot of flooding in the region. For example, during the past 6 years, an average of over 2 million people being affected by floods. Even in extreme dry years, that is 2019 to 2021, at least 150,000 people were affected. And in the wet years, 2018, the year 2000, the number of people suffering from floods can increase to 12 million people in the basin. In sum, flow regime, sediment, salinity, plastic, flood, and drought. While these are the 5 areas of great concerns, I have mixed news for the water quality, ecological health, and fish. And I have better news for our social and economic indicators. For aquatic life and human health, water quality along the mainstream seems to be quite good at most sites, although water temperature has risen by more than 1.5 degrees Celsius since 2010. While there are signs of ecological stress, the ecological health of the river remain generally excellent, with no more stations at the last time we recorded of being poor. Turning to fish, one of the most important resources. Our latest 2022 assessment appears to suggest that, in general, a similar amount of fish are being caught in the basin, with an annual yield of nearly 1.7 million tons, plus aquatic animals of around 400,000 tons. The economic value of captured fisheries and aquatic animals in the basin is over $9.1 billion. $9.1 billion. So that's a lot of value. Nevertheless, fish we notice that are being caught are smaller and some shorter in life than expected. And in the zones that have the greatest stress are from downstream of Nam Bang to Vientiane and from Nam Can to Sting Treng. Regarding the social dimension, the good news is that the overall living conditions in the basin are improving across the board. Poverty has reduced. For example, in Cambodia, household income doubled from 2013 to 2020. Poverty halved. Access to water and related resources has increased to similar level as in Thailand and Vietnam. Cambodia has increased its electricity access to 80% all over the country, with Laos, Vietnam, Thailand almost now 100%. In addition to fish, the Mekong continues to be significant for the economies of the basin. The quantity of rice produced has grown strongly over the past 20 years. The latest figure, 2020, was over 51 million tons. Half of that is produced by Vietnam, a third in Thailand. There is also a major growth in aquaculture, especially in the Delta. And it has increased, for example, from 2015, 1.8 million tons to 2.4 million tons in 2020. Cambodia, traditionally very reliant on captured fish, for example, has quadrupled its aquaculture production in 2020. In sum, the Mekong and water-related resources, including hydropower development, contributes $188 billion to the Mekong economy, 2019 figure, up from $139 billion in 2015, so 35% increase in 4 years. Now, I painted a broad picture for you in the basin. Let me describe how the MRC are supporting member countries to address some of the environmental crises that I've mentioned and to realize more opportunities for growth. Over the last year, our work has concentrated on 2 key roles of the MRC, the knowledge hub and the innovation and modernization that we bring, and water diplomacy platform. Under the knowledge hub, we have enhanced the communication and use of our services for flood and drought forecasting. In line with the digital age, we are exploring big data and artificial intelligence, as you have seen in this conference. And no, my speech has not been drafted by ChatGPT. Not yet anyway. And from the current weekly forecast, we are now developing capacity to take medium to longer term forecasts, 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, to be rolled out later this year. This is very critical information for our countries and farmers and stakeholders to respond and be prepared in time. Last November, we approved our redesigned core river monitoring network. The core network takes what was one individual river monitoring systems, hydrology, sediment, ecological health, water quality, fish, and now collects data in a more integrated way. It incorporates even the monitoring method and stations of the Joint Environment Monitoring Program for the mainstream dams. The network puts on track for us to be able to capture timely changes in the river due to climate change and water infrastructure operation. In the long run, though, we need more cost-effective technology. This is why we have turned to our youth, the brightest and the best universities, to come up with homegrown tech. In a way, this is also to inspire the youth to monitor the river, understand what's happening, and therefore take actions. Much more than monitoring, we are continuing to also address the pressure on some of our resources. For example, fisheries. We are finally secure, after 5 years, to roll out the preliminary guidance for mainstream dam, the updated version, with the latest knowledge, practice on fish passes. We also supported countries to apply 2 new fishway guidelines for thousands of irrigation schemes in the basin to remove some of the barriers to build more fish passes. But more than mitigation, we will also bring additional financial resources to benefit directly the people. We have worked with our partners on a transformative transboundary fishery program, one aiming to increase value chains, reconnect swimways, and offer alternative livelihoods. And finally, we hope to soon launch with our partner the Mekong Fund implementation, targeting the improvement in livelihoods and biodiversity in critical hotspots. As the Mekong is a large, complex system with many parts, players, perceptions, within and without the basin, a shared understanding on the most critical issues are necessary before cooperation can take place. And that is why we are very pleased to almost complete the first phase of our joint study with the Lansang Mekong River Center, as well as China, on the changing hydrological regimes. After many sessions, technical, modeling, informal talk, we are on our way to reach a common understanding, and more importantly, on the sets of recommendations that will help the countries adapt to this changing flow regime. And this work is also related to 2 other work, which we think is strategic shifts and never been done before in the Mekong. First, the work on cooperative mechanisms for data sharing and notification for Mekong dams and reservoirs. Second, we have embarked on a proactive regional planning exercise, which is, I think, is not a traditional planning exercise. It is rather a proactive management intervention to address the most critical basin issues and needs: sediment, environmental limits, storage options, water energy mix, and at the same time upgrade our decision support system to have operational capacity. We will deliver this system by the end of the year, and next year the new planning information will be delivered. In terms of water diplomacy, we are actively facilitating dialogue and discussions on the proposed mainstream dams. While there are differences between the views of our member countries, they, to their credit, remain in dialogue. And the MRC remains objective and impartial to facilitate a meaningful process, embedded in the existing procedures, but providing additional technical assessment, data collection, and support to meet the interests of the countries. And after 18 years, the first ever transboundary EIA guidelines has been agreed for voluntary application. Laos has launched the guidelines for the Sekong A hydropower project, which is important because this is a project on the tributary. And we have no doubt that a lot of lessons will be learned, transparency will be gained, capacity will be built, cooperation and trust will be enhanced between Laos, Cambodia, and Thailand, and Vietnam. And a better development is therefore in place for the future. Make no mistake, the first TBIA process will be trial and error. It will not be perfect. But under my leadership, the MRC is not and will not be in the business of pointing fingers. As I said, we are in the business of ensuring dialogue, building understanding, and share data information and adapt. And between Cambodia and Thailand, with our partners, we have supported for many years a joint project, joint assessment, capacity building, installation of monitoring and information system in their shared river basin in the cross-border area, also incorporating nature-based solutions. Another area where our diplomacy works is facilitating common rules and regulation of navigation for the common river border, almost 1,000 kilometers between Laos and Thailand. You may be surprised that each country has their own rules for vessels, for the use of the river, which in parts have rocky outcrops, narrow channels, deep and strong currents in the rainy season. After much work, we have concluded common rules for the countries to use, and this will facilitate safe travel, trade, and economic growth. Now, why we believe in the work that we do and that they matter, this is only a fraction of what needs to be done in the Mekong, given the scale of the challenges. The MRC is indispensable, but it does have its limits. Rather than have a big mouth to point always to our failures, maybe sometimes it's okay, have a big heart to understand our mandate, our role, and support us to, again, address gaps and do what we cannot. At the recent UN Water Conference, leaders from around the world got together and made various commitments to water action. Here in the Mekong, we don't just want action, but we want action that makes a difference. None of the broader challenges will be easy to overcome, nor has the different overarching national interests of the riparian countries disappeared. This may spark occasional tensions among us, while external forces also have their own agenda. Given our region's history and strategic location, it seems we are forever a hotspot for competition, intervention, and power plays. We live in peaceful times in this region, thanks to the cooperative spirit and institutions such as the UN, ASEAN, and MRC, which lay down clear rules of engagement, foster dialogue, and build trust. Yet we also live, make no mistake, in dangerous times, with tectonic shifts in the global geopolitical landscape that have implications for Southeast Asia. Last year, at the Mekong address, I said, our environmental crisis deserves a sense of urgency. Our feet should be on fire. Today, however, I said, we should not add fuel to fire. We call on the riparian countries partners and stakeholders to act. But the way we choose to act, the way our friends in the region and outside the region act, will determine the fate of the Mekong. I have full confidence that our leaders, when they meet in 2 days, will send a message of unity. They will prioritize the issues that need to be addressed: the changing flow regime, sediment, fish, plastic, climate change. And they will point out that cooperation, not conflict, dialogue, not division, will prevail, as they have always been since the MRC was established. Please join us, friends, Mekong citizens, partners, and stakeholders, in this cooperative spirit, and innovate and act to make a difference. Thank you very much.